2 years had passed, yet for Abena, time had lost all meaning. Days blurred into nights, weeks into months, months into years. She remained trapped within the cold, desolate ritual room. Her existence reduced to an endless cycle of pain and horror. Every 3 months, it happened again. The dark rituals, the cruel incantation, the serene cut across her skin as her blood dripped onto the unholy symbol carved into the floor. She had lost count of how many times she had screamed, how many times she had begged for mercy, only to be met with Mr. Akwa's mocking laughter. The walls, once terrifying and suffocating, had now become her only companions. She could trace every crack, every stain of dry blood, every haunting shadow that never truly left. Escape was a fantasy she had long clung to, but no matter how many times she tried, she never succeeded. She had fought, she had screamed, she had even tried to run. On rare occasions, she was allowed to move freely within the mansions. But each time Mr. Akwa caught her with an almost supernatural ease, as if he could sense her every move. And each time he would press her against the wall, his breath cold against her ear, his voice dripping with venom. "Do you want me to kill your family?" he would whisper, his lips coiling into a wicked smile. "If you dare to escape, not only will you die, but your family will too. And I will stop sending them money. Your father will rot, your mother will suffer. They will curse the day you were born." The threats had drained the fight from her, little by little, until she had nothing left. She no longer had the strength to resist. The guilt of her family's potential suffering weighed heavier than the pain inflicted upon her body. What if they were truly living the life she had always dreamed for them? What if her sacrifice meant that her father was getting treatment, that her mother was never hungry again, that her siblings were going to school? She closed her eyes and imagined them in a grand house, wearing fine clothes, eating meals she had never been able to eat. If that was the case, then her suffering was a small price to pay. She would endure. She had to. But Abena didn't know the truth. She didn't know that back in the village, her family was not living in luxury or wealth, nor even comfort. They were drowning in suffering, worse than ever before. Mr. Akwa had never sent them a dime, not a single kobo. Her father, once a strong man, had withered into a fragile shell of himself, his body ravaged by sickness and grief. The light in his eyes had dimmed, his strength drained by the weight of guilt and regret. Every day he laid on a thin, tattered mat, barely able to lift his head, whispering Abena's name like a prayer. Her mother was no better. The once proud woman who had dreamed of a better future now spent her days in endless sorrow. Her body had grown thinner, her once lively spirit now crushed beneath the burden of uncertainty. Every night, she knelt on the floor of their crumbling home, her hands gripping the hem of her old wrapper, her tears soaking the ground as she begged God to bring back her daughter. She did not know where Abena was. She did not know if she was alive or dead, but she prayed. She prayed harder than she had ever prayed in her life, believing, hoping that one day her child would return. Then one day, an unexpected visitor arrived in the village. Kofi, the man who had once promised Abena a future before vanishing into the chaos of the city. He had spent years working tirelessly, struggling to build a life for himself. He was not as wealthy as Mr. Akwa, but he was stable, well off enough to take care of Abena and her family. He had returned, driving a small but respectable car, bringing bags of provision, gifts, and hope. But as he stepped out of the vehicle, his smile faded. The sight before him was not what he had expected. The family he had once known, full of hope and laughter, was now drowning in misery. Kofi's heart clenched as he stepped into their home. It was smaller now, more broken, a shadow of what it had once been. He took in the frail figure of Abena's father, the gaunt, hollow-eyed woman who was once her mother. He had expected joy, but instant there was silence. Something was wrong. "Where is Abena?" he asked, forcing a smile. "Is she in the river, the market?" But no one answered him. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, pressing against his chest like a stone. He turned to Abena's mother, who struggled to hold his gaze, her lips trembling as she fought back tears. It was only when Kofi asked again, his voice more urgent, that the silence broke. Abena's mother fell to her knees, her cry racking her frail body. We we forced our daughter into a marriage, Kofi, she choked out. We gave her away to a man for wealth, but now we don't know where she is. He gave us a fake address, a fake phone number. He deceived us. Her voice cracked under the weight of her grief, but Kofi barely heard the rest. The words echoed in his mind, a sharp, unforgiving blade carving through his heart. For a moment, he thought it was a joke, a cruel prank. He forced out a shaky laugh, stepping back, looking around as if expecting Abena to appear. "This is a lie," he said, shaking his head. "Abena, I know you are hiding somewhere. I'm sorry for not keeping my promise. I should have written. I should have come back sooner. Please come out. Let's talk." But no one moved. And when he turned to Abena's mother again, the sincerity in her tears-filled eyes sent a chill through his soul. The truth crashed into him with full force. She was gone. They had given her away, and now she was lost. A deep, burning rage ignited in Kofi's chest, spreading like wildfire, his hands clutched into fists, his nails digging into his palm, his entire body trembling with fury. He couldn't believe it. They had sold her to a man they knew nothing about. They had traded her away for promises that had never come true. His voice was low, but it dripped with anger, with pain, with betrayal. "If I don't find Abena," he said slowly, his eyes burning with fury, "I will never forgive any of you. Never. And I will make sure you all pay for it, for whatever you have done to her." Without another word, he turned on his shoes and stormed out of the house, his heart pounding with determination. He had wasted too much time. He had let too much slip through his finger, but no more. He would go to the city. He would track down this man, no matter how long it took, no matter what it cost him. He would find Abena. He would make sure he find Abena. As he drove away from the village, his jaw tightened, his hands gripping the wheels with unrelenting force. He didn't know what awaited him in the city. He didn't know what horror he would uncover, but one thing was certain: he will not fail her again. He would find her, even if he had to tear the world apart to do it. Kofi returned to the city with a single mission burning in his soul: to find Abena. He didn't waste a single moment. The first thing he did was printing multiple copies of a photo from years ago when Abena's smile was still vibrant, a stark contrast to the hollow desperate search that now consumed him. Holding her picture, he studied her face, his heart breaking, imagining the horrors she meant be enduring. With a heavy heart, he began his search, moving quickly from police station to police station, showing her photo, pleading for help. His voice trembled with urgency as he spoke. "This is my wife. She disappeared 2 years ago. Please, I need to find her." Some officer nodded with sympathy, but their words were empty. They could offer no real help. Others barely acknowledged him, dismissing the matter as just another case of a missing person. "People disappear every day," one officer had said coldly. But Kofi wasn't discouraged. He couldn't give up, not when he didn't even know if she was still alive. Kofi continued on his relentless search through the city. Each day passed in the same grueling routine, and each day without a sign of Abena felt like another crushing blow to his spirit. He followed every lead, visited countless places, and spoke to anyone who meant to know anything, but each attempt ended in failure. Weeks turned into months, and still there was no word of Abena. Meanwhile, back in the village, Kofi received calls from Abena's parents, their voices trembling with hope. "Have you found her? Is there any news?" But every time, the answer remained the same: "No, there is nothing yet." The family's sorrow deepened with each passing day. Every night they prayed for her return, clinging to the fragile hope that their daughter would be safe and found. The villagers, too, had begun to whisper, watching the once vibrant family fall into despair. They had seen them in their prime, but now they were a shadows of their former selves, hanging on a thread. Kofi's efforts to bring Abena home only grew more desperate. He plastered her pictures all over the city, on street corners, bus stops, even the windows of shops. He used his own money to print thousands of copies, hoping that anyone might have seen her. Desperation led him to take the search online, sharing her photo on every social media platform he could find. "If anyone has seen this woman, please call me. Her family is looking for her. Please, she needs to be found." But as days passed, weeks became months, and still there was nothing. Every lead turned cold. Time dragged on like an endless void, and then every time Abena's mother called, her voice quivering with hope, Kofi would close his eyes, his heart heavy as he tells her the word that ripped him apart. "No, not yet." The silence between them grew, and each conversation left him feeling more powerless. The city was too big, too cruel. The walls of despair seemed to close in around him, but he couldn't stop. He won't stop. If he didn't look for her, who would? And when there was nothing else left to do, Kofi would pray. He would kneel beside his bed, bury his face in his hand, and cry into the darkness. "God, please, I'm begging you, don't let her be in any bad situation. Please let me find her. Please bring her home." But the silence that followed was suffocating. The darkness felt endless. Even the villagers, some of whom had pushed Abena into the marriage that had led to her disappearance, some came together at Abena's family house. They gathered together in prayer, their voices quiet but firm. "Lord, wherever she is, protect her. If she's alive, bring her home safely. Have mercy on this family." But the fear never left. What if Abena was already dead? What if this was all for nothing? One evening, Kofi slumped in front of his TV, too exhausted to do anything else. He had been walking the streets all day, handing out flyers, desperately hoping for a miracle. He turned on the news, not really expecting anything, just needing a distraction. But then, something caught his attention. The breaking news flashed across the screen. Breaking news: a man known as Peter Kwame has been arrested for ritual killing. Kofi barely glanced at the TV, dismissing it as just another story of evil men doing wicked things. But then, the camera zoomed in on the arrest scene. The police had surrounded a man, handcuffed and struggling. Kofi's eyes narrowed, his attention now focused on the screen. The announcer spoke gravely of the man's involvement in ritualistic activities. The police had discovered humans' remains in his home, human parts, charms, bloody clothes, evidence of unspeakable horrors. The screen flashed a disturbing image of a raid as police officers searched the man's house, and Kofi felt a cold chill run down his spine. The news anchor's voice grew serious as he warned viewers of graphic content, and then the camera showed something that made Kofi's heart stop. It was Abena, her frail body lying in a hospital bed, covered in wounds, barely clinging to life. The sight of her was a shock. Her skin was covered in deep, vicious cuts. Her once beautiful hair was now thin and lifeless. Her eyes, those once vibrant eyes Kofi had known so well, were now dull, empty. She had been through hell, and it was all too much for him to process. His heart tightened as the truth hit him like a hammer. Kofi froze in place, his entire body trembling, his breath caught in his throat as the image of Abena on the screen filled his vision. He couldn't breathe, he couldn't move, but then the news anchor dropped another bombshell. The man who had been arrested was none other than Peter Kwame, also known as Mr. Akwa. Kofi's mind raced as the pieces clicked into place. Mr. Akwa, this was the man who had taken Abena. This was the monster who had hidden her from them. For a moment, Kofi's mind went blank, lost in a storm of thought and rage. Then, in a sudden burst of clarity, he snapped back to reality. His hands trembled as he fumbled for his keys, his heart pounding in his chest. He grabbed them from the table and dashed out the door, not even bothering to lock it behind him. Within minutes, he was in his car, speeding towards the village. The car seemed to fly over the road, the urgency inside him building with each passing seconds. He had to tell them, he had to tell Abena's family what he had just discovered. Kofi's heart pounded as he entered Abena's family house, his mind racing with urgency. He barely had time to explain everything before they rushed to the hospital, the weight of the news pressing down on them all. When they arrived and saw Abena lying motionless on the hospital bed, it was a sight none of them could have prepared for. Her once beautiful face was barely recognizable, her body covered in scars and patches of maggots dotted on her skin. The smell of decay hung in the air, making it harder to breathe. Abena's mother was the first to break, her tears flowing freely as she reached out, her hands trembling as she touched her daughter's frail body. But Abena's gaze was far away, her eyes empty, as though she wasn't seeing anything at all. The doctors had done what they could, but it was clear that Abena was too far gone. Her body ravaged by what she had endured. In a final act of desperation, they called in a pastor to pray over her, but even his fervent prayers brought no physical change. After the prayer, the room fell still, and it was as though the very air held its breath, waiting for a sign. Then something moved. Abena's finger twitched, her dry lips parted, and her mother gasped. Abena's gaze shifted slowly, locking onto her father, who sat silently in the corner of the room. The old man lifted his weary head, trembling as he looked at his daughter. Abena's smile was small but soft, like a quiet relief after years of suffering. In a barely hearable whisper, she asked, "Are you happy now?" Her father's breath caught in his throat. He tried to speak, but no words came out. His eyes welled up with tears as he stared at his daughter, the realization of his failures too much to bear. Abena's smile deepened, almost peaceful, as she whispered once more, "Are you enjoying your life now?" The smile was the last thing they saw before her eyes closed forever. Her tears no longer rose or fell. Abena was gone. They rushed to call the doctor, and the doctor confirmed that Abena was dead. Abena's father could not handle the weight of the loss. The grief of seeing his daughter die because of him, coupled with the crushing regret of his choices, was too much for him to bear. His mind replayed the decision that led them here, the forced marriage, the belief that wealth could make his family happy and living healthy, the lie that he had sold his daughter's soul for. Now, as he sat beside Abena's lifeless body, all the wealth in the world meant nothing. It was empty, hallowed. His regret consumed him completely. His heart couldn't take it. He collapsed beside Abena's bed, his chest heavy with pain, and with one final desperate gasp, his heart gave out. He died right there, his grief so overwhelming that it took his life in an instant. The pain he had caused, the damage he had done, it all crushed him in the end. In a matter of hours, Abena was gone, and so was her father. Abena's mother, alone now with nothing but the shattered remnants of her family, was left to live with the consequences of their choices. Her grief never subsided. She found herself drifting through each day in a haste, haunted by the memories of her daughter and the sound of her husband's final breath. The regret nagged at her, and though she had learned too late that money could never replace love, she was left to face the ruin of her choices. She remained in the village, living in isolation, surrounded by people who pitied her but also held her accountable for the tragedy that had befallen them all. While Kofi was left broken by Abena's death, his love for her deepened, and now that she was gone, it felt as though a part of him had been rippled away. The thought of anyone else in his life was impossible. The memory of Abena lingered like a constant ache, reminding him of what he had lost. But it wasn't just the loss of Abena that weighed heavily on him. He would not forgive her parents for what they had done to her. The decision to sell her to a man they barely knew for the promise of wealth, Kofi would never forgive them for that. They had destroyed her, and now they were left to face the consequences of their greed. Even as time passed, his anger towards them grew. Abena's death had robbed him of his peace, and he will not forgive those who had played a part in her suffering. The villagers would never forget Abena. They spoke of her with a mixture of pity and regret, recalling the once beautiful girl who had been sacrificed for greed. Her story became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of wealth and the cost of ambition. The name Abena was whispered on every corner, tied to a tragedy that no one could undo. It was a story that lived on in the hearts of those who had known her, a story that would forever be tied to the downfall of her family.